All right, so since you had a question that applies to everybody, I will repeat your question, which was with regard to the duck hunt, you have to have a certain number of ducks in order to get the points, which is how I grade class participation as the duck hunt. If you get more than are necessary, does that count as bonus points? And the answer to that is yes, that they count as bonus points. So it behooves you to try and get as many ducks as you can, because if you don't do well on the essays or something like that, it will help boost those scores. And typically speaking, the scores on the essays, at least initially, are not necessarily wonderful, because business students are not the best at writing traditional sort of essays. I do it because I think it forces you to think beyond more than 30-second sound bites, which is critically important, that at some point you learn to, there we go. All right. Turn that off. I was waiting to see if it was gonna work. That you learn that you have to have some kind of sustained thought. It's really, really hard in an age in which everything seems to be a 30-second soundbite, and we can just plug everything into our AI bots or whatever and come up with quick answers to things that are maybe not necessarily that easy to answer. I will admit that I am as guilty as any of you of doing this. I have a pair of Meta glasses, and I ask the Meta glasses all kinds of things all the time, and it gives you an instant. I mean, it's incredible what technology is able to do now. But at some point, we have to actually produce something, and that's going to require, I think, sustained capabilities of engaging in critical analysis. Even if you are using artificial intelligence, which is a disruptive technology and will be a game changer, it's understanding that you can't just completely rely on it. In fact, I think I mentioned this, there have been lawyers who at the beginning of ChatGPT decided that they were just going to use ChatGPT to write their briefs for them. And it turns out that some of the information that ChatGPT came up with was fake case citations. And this led to problems for the attorneys that filed briefs that had basically made up case citation. So it's still one of those things where it's definitely a learning curve, but we're going to have to show and demonstrate that we can think critically. I think even in the future, that's going to be absolutely critical, even though we have these large language models that can, in many respects, produce some enormously beneficial work product. So we were talking last time about ancient thought, and we started talking about Plato and Republic, and I told you that this is the first in the Western tradition fully worked out system of philosophy that we have, in that it answers all three of those questions. Republic answers all three of the questions of the question of knowledge, the question of conduct, and the question of governance. And the reason that that is important is because it sort of jettisons the way we answered these questions before that, which was to rely on mythology or to rely on religion. I told you that those were the two other ways that you could rely on transmittal of answering these three questions. You can rely on a mythology or you can rely on religion. The reason I think that the Greeks came up with philosophy, that the Greeks invented, is that their religion was not terribly satisfying in terms of answering these three questions. Going to the books didn't really answer a lot. The gods were certainly important in ancient Greece, but they were just sort of like superhumans. For those of you who have had humanities, ancient through modern, and you've studied the Greek, classics and the architecture and things like that, they built these great temples. How did the Greeks view their gods? Well, who was the king of the gods for the Greeks?
Zeus.
Zeus, that's correct. And how did Zeus become king of the gods?
He
Kill his fight his dad.
Kronos.
He killed his father. That's how he becomes. I mean, sorry about that. These are not people, you don't want to upset them, but you're not turning to them for these ultimate questions in life about really important stuff. I mean, if a God can die, how important are they in answering these sort of fundamental questions of what is the meaning of life? These three questions, the question of knowledge, conduct, and governance, really go to the essence of, what is a good life? And so with regard to ethics, we're going to now turn from the ancients. We'll come back to the ancients in a minute when we talk about virtue ethics, which has become a major topic of interest in this field in recent history. And I've written some in this area because the answers that are provided by virtue ethics are more holistic than the others. So we talked about the invalid theories, subjectivism, cultural relativism, and the deterministic theory of psychological egoism. And we said that the reason that these are not valid is that they fail all three of these prongs to be a valid theory, that it is based on reason, that it allows for the development of universal applicable rules or principles, and it allows for no exceptionalism. So we're going to turn to some modern theories that are the ones that business students prefer the most, and we'll talk about the first one that business students prefer the most first, and it's the one that we are most comfortable with because it is the one that is most closely associated with classical capitalistic economic theory, and that's called utilitarianism. So if I asked you, when does the modern era begin? Let's see if I can get that to come up. When does the modern era begin? What are you all going to say? What do you think is the beginning of the modern era?
Industrial Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution. That's a good guess. It's wrong. Why is it wrong? I mean, I understand why people think this, because things changed rapidly in the Industrial Revolution. The way we went from marketing and producing things radically expanded in the Industrial Revolution in ways that before had not been possible. So before the Industrial Revolution, how were goods and things manufactured? How were products delivered? They were largely produced locally and in small batches. So you took your wool, if you were a sheep farmer in England, for example, to the local market and you sold it there, or maybe you didn't sell it, you bartered for things like eggs and meat and cheese, and all of that was sort of locally produced and sustained. The Industrial Revolution allows for the mass production of goods and the distribution of those goods through efficient methods of logistical channels, not sort of logistic channels that, were things like shipping, rail, all of those things. The automobile develops in the Industrial Revolution that allows for the transportation of people across much larger distances in a much more efficient way. I was born and raised on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico, and I grew up having horses and showing horses and stuff like that. And that's fun. They're a lot of fun, but not terribly efficient. In fact, why do we have 77, as a result of our agrarian roots in Oklahoma, why do we have 77 counties in Oklahoma? That's a lot of counties for a state our size. I think New Mexico, which is a larger state, geographically, not in terms of population, but in terms of geography, only has something like 35, that's my home state, I think it's 35 counties. Oklahoma has 77. Why do we have 77 counties? Anybody know the history of that? I'm gonna look and make sure I got that right. How many counties does New Mexico have? Just to make sure I didn't get that. 33, so it's close. 33. New Mexico geographically is, I believe, the 5th largest state. So it's larger than Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma is 7th in terms of geography, and Oklahoma has 77 counties. Why is that? When was Oklahoma founded? And how were we founded?
1907.
1907 is statehood, but before then you have to have a population before you achieve statehood. So how did we found Oklahoma. Oklahoma's unique.
Native territories.
Land run?
We did it through Land Run. Who said Land Run? Yeah. We did it through Land Run. So on April 22nd, 1889, people lined up north of the Cimarron River. A cannon went off at high noon, and people ran for the land of the unassigned territories, right? So we had then two territories after that date, April 22nd, 1889. We had Indian Territory and we had Oklahoma Territory. So we had two. It was the taking away of the unassigned lands and reallocating them for non-native settlement in Oklahoma. So we have this land run on April 22nd. And then we had a couple of other land runs in the state that allowed people to run for land. And when we combined the two and applied for statehood and got statehood, we then came up with 77 counties. And the reason was, how did they run in the land run in 1889? By and large, on the whole, for the most part. What did you use to run for this land? Did they get in their car?
A horse.
A horse. Yeah, they ran, mostly, there was like a couple of people that ran on a bicycle. There were some people that jumped off the train. But by and large, on the whole, most people ran on horseback or by covered wagon. There's a great art piece in downtown Oklahoma City in the Bricktown area that highlights this. It's 1 3/4 size, so it's larger than life size of the Oklahoma land run. And it's right down on the Riverwalk at the end. If you go, how many of you have seen this, gone to Bass Pro? If you go to Bass Pro and then slightly south of Bass Pro, you'll run into the land run statue. How many of you have been down there to see it? None of you. Okay, it's really worth seeing this incredibly large piece of public art. So we ran on horseback primarily, and that was the primary mode of transportation. And the reason we have 77 counties is because you could get anywhere in the county to the county seat in half a day's ride on a horse. The idea was that people had to conduct commerce, and they needed to be, that was largely done in county seats. And so you needed to be close enough to the county seat to be able to conduct commerce. How do you do that? Well, if you have to ride in a wagon or on a horseback, it made it efficient for people to get to the county seat and be able to do that in an efficient way. So we have this agricultural roots. And so I can understand why the Industrial Revolution is a good response, but maybe not the most correct response for why that's the beginning of modernity, because things radically change in the era in which we start having the mass production of cars. The Ford Model T radically changed just the way artificial intelligence is going to change the way we conduct business. We can come up with all kinds of things, and very, very quickly, if you've used AI at all, it's really entertaining. I've used it primarily to come up with things that are entertaining for my family, sort of spoofs. I've taken pictures of my nephew and I and run them through AI and asked it to develop movie posters and all kinds of, like Renaissance pictures. And so it's highly entertaining, but it's also very useful, right? It's going to change the way that we develop all kinds of stuff. I know all kinds of our sales partners, the people who are hiring our sales students, are using AI to generate letters for business and for promotions that they are sending out, because it does it in correct English much faster than you can generate it yourself. Now you have to check it and make sure, because it doesn't do some things well at this point. So for example, it doesn't, and I wrote a case study on this for one of our competitions, it doesn't necessarily understand pricing models very well at this point because it doesn't have enough data on pricing models. So I actually came up with an ethics case study that we did at one of our competitions based on the use of AI and developing pricing models, which were completely unrealistic. So it's radically changed things. The car radically changed the way we engage in business. You no longer have to be within a half a day of the county seat. you could literally be anywhere in Oklahoma. We could have one large county and you'd be within half a day. Even in the furthest western part of the Panhandle, if we said we're gonna have one county and it's gonna be Oklahoma County, you would be within half a day's drive of that county seat. And maybe we should consolidate those counties because it's not terribly efficient to have them out there. There's more sheep and goats and pigs in some of our western Panhandle counties than there are people. Should we continue to have all of these counties? Maybe not. Is that an efficient way of conducting government? You have in each county 3 county commissioners. You have a county clerk, a court clerk, a county treasurer, a county assessor. All of those people have to have staff. You could consolidate those counties and save money. Now, the problem is in government, nobody wants to give up their position. Nobody wants to voluntarily give up power. And so it doesn't necessarily occur, but it would be more efficient if we did that. And the automobile and the Industrial Revolution really, really allowed for that kind of expansion of commerce in ways that we had not heretofore thought about. So why is that not the beginning of modernity? What makes something modern, and what is the answer to the beginning of modernity? Most historians will say that modernity begins in the Quattrocento in Italy, and with the thinking of one person. The first modern man is an individual named Niccolò Bernardo de Machiavelli. And he is a Florentine official, and he loses his job as a Florentine, as a diplomat in Florence, and he loses his job when the Medici come back into power. And so he spends the rest of his life sort of trying to get back, and he dies shortly after writing a very famous work, which becomes his most famous work, called The Prince. Now, if you want to read a work of philosophy that's rather short and pithy, The Prince is it. The Prince is one of these that you can read in one sitting. Almost all world leaders have read The Prince. And the reason that it is modern, and the reason that we say that this is the beginning of the modern era, is because when you read The Prince, it is absolutely just the raw analysis of the way that power is exercised. Prior to The Prince, it was believed that power was derived from God. And Machiavelli denies this. Machiavelli discusses just the way governments operate in a very cold and calculating manner. His name has become associated with absolutely ruthless character. Now, I think Machiavelli actually gets a very bad rap for The Prince because it's not his major work. It was in his mind, a very minor work that he wrote specifically for Lorenzo de' Medici in an attempt to try and get his job back. And so Lorenzo is sort of the prince in this, and he's trying to persuade the Medici family to let him back into power. And it was written for a very specific purpose, but it has become his most well-known work. In that work, Machiavelli says, I'm not going to talk about republics. I talk about those somewhere else, and he does. And I think that work is actually Machiavelli's more important work. That work is a more complete work on political theory, and it's called Discourses on the First 12 Books of Titus Livy. And in that, he discusses all other kinds of governmental organizations besides principalities. But the Prince is this completely rational, secular view of the world, and that's what makes it modern. Is before the Prince, what you saw was a reliance on, when we talk about the way you can acquire these answers to the question of knowledge, conduct, and governance, relied on the book. All Western thought before that time relied upon either religion or mythology to sort of answer these questions. And Machiavelli makes this hard break and says that's not the way it really works. And so The Prince is the first modern work of political theory that answers these three sort of questions of knowledge, conduct, and governance. It also is the beginning of the 15th century, the discovery of the New World, and that's what also makes it modern. Is we have the discovery of what becomes the Americas, and so that's the beginning of modern sort of philosophical and historic thought. And it's this divorcing of thought from the religious or the sacred from the secular. This leads to, in terms of ethics, the development of a capitalistic system and a way of thinking about things that is based on the writings of a few people in the Enlightenment called John Stuart Mill, and on the economic side, Adam Smith. So they apply a completely modern analysis to the field of ethics and economics. And what is economics? Well, it relies on the maximization of utility. Now, that's what economists will tell you a capitalistic system should do, is that it will allow for the most efficient distribution of scarce resources based on those people that are willing to pay the most for the resource. The free hand of the market should decide how we allocate things. Because if I have something that is useful and I can sell it to somebody, they'll pay the most amount of money for it, right? In theory. So it's the maximization of utility in terms of economic principles, and business students are steeped in this idea of the of efficiencies of markets in terms of the distribution of scarce goods and services. Those people that most want and will benefit from scarce resources will be willing to pay the most for those resources. And in theory, we have the efficient market hypothesis. Now, in ethics terms, now there's problems with that, in that you can have what are called market failures, which are problems in the capitalist system. What are market failures? Anybody know what a market failure is? Market failures often occur when economics can't place a value on something because it's not something that you can control in a private way. So these ducks, I got these ducks, I started collecting these ducks when my mother was going through chemo. We would go, my best friend and I would go and walk the mall, and they had this duck catching device where it's got a claw, and you play this game, you insert $1, and you were guaranteed to win, unlike a lot of the claw games where you chance it and you don't win and it's over and you have to put another $1 in. The thing that made the duck catching machine kind of unique was that you could play until you caught a duck. And so the challenge becomes not in catching the duck, it's in trying to identify which specific duck it is that you want in the duck catching machine, because you were guaranteed a duck. And at the end, after you caught the duck, it got it in the claw and it dropped it, and it sensed that you had won, it would say, "You're a winner." And there's nothing like being told you're a winner from this stupid automated voice of this duck machine to make you feel all better about the world. So we were playing this every time we'd go to the mall. We would play this stupid, and then I had all of these ducks, and I thought, well, what the hell am I going to do with all of these ducks that I've got? And I thought, well, this is a great way of keeping track of the way students participate in my class, because before that, I would just sort of have to say, if you talk to me, come up and let me know, and I'll give you the points for discussing in class today. And students would inevitably run out the door before they'd come up and told me that they participated in class and get their points for class participation. And so this became a way of ensuring, because they have to give me the ducks back, that I could could objectively determine whether or not people had participated in class. So I found a use for these stupid ducks. They have really no purpose. They're not even really good rubber ducks, because if you put them in a bathtub, they don't, like a rubber ducky that you would have for children to play with. First of all, what's wrong with these that you shouldn't give them to small children to play with? Well, they can swallow them and choke on the smaller ones. The bigger ones, I guess, not so much. But even the bigger ones, like a rubber duck should, if you put it in the tub, should float and should stay upright. That's what a rubber duck should do. They don't even do that. They float, sort of, but they'll float upside down, they'll tip over, they're not really made, they've got no useful purpose. So I found a useful purpose for them, which is to keep track of how much participation students engage in. And so I'm willing to pay something, and then because people steal the ducks from time, they forget to give me the ducks back and they steal the ducks. Or I've just had students ask me, can I have a duck as a memento of your class? I don't know why anybody would want that, but I guess some people actually do enjoy the class and want to remember it, so they want to take a duck. So I've had to find more ducks, and so I bought ducks. So I'm willing to pay a price for these ducks because they're useful for me. I have found a purpose for these ducks. Now they've got another purpose I found out years later after I started doing this. What's the big purpose of the ducks now? Anybody know?
Jeeps.
Jeeps, that's exactly correct. People who have a Jeep Wrangler trade the ducks as they pull up alongside another Jeep Wrangler. They will exchange the ducks, and I have no idea how that got started. But I'm gonna guess it's something sort of similar to the way I started with the ducks in this class. So I'm willing to pay something for these ducks because they are useful for me in terms of being able to monitor and record whether or not you participate in class. So the ducks are useful, so I'm willing to pay something for the ducks, and I'm willing to go back through the duck hunt and put more dollars in order to get them. I've now found that you can buy the ducks at Walmart, but it's not as much fun as going to the duck hunting thing. And the ones at Walmart tend to be all the same. They are like either just colors, there's lots of ducks in here. This is an Uncle Fester duck, by the way. Like there's a, I don't know, this is like a tiger striped duck. This is a Mohawk duck, right? So there's all these different ducks and it's kind of interesting when I used to just hand the basket to see which people will pick. It's an interesting psychological experiment. Now I just kind of throw the ducks at you. So anyways, I've got this purpose for these ducks. I'm willing to pay for these ducks. They're a private good that I am willing to pay for in order to utilize what is ultimately a service to me, which is keeping track of how many of you participate in class. The duck can be touched, it can be possessed, it can be held, and it's got these physical qualities that make it easy for me to do that. There are things that are difficult for us to put a price on, but they may be necessary. Things like clean air. This is where market failures come in that all of us want clean air. Do we have clean air? In many instances, we don't, because we can't charge for clean air. We all need it as a result of the fact that we are increasing emissions at record-breaking levels due to industrialization and the mass movement of people using cars and boats and trucks and planes. We're doing colossal damage to the air quality in many, many places. It's incredible for those of you that remember what happened in COVID. They did this thing before, showed pictures of before some major cities like Los Angeles before COVID. And then after a month of the shutdown in the era of COVID, what happened to air quality in places like Los Angeles? Los Angeles is, if you've ever been there, largely filled with smog, from all of the emissions that occur every single day as people sit in traffic for hours and hours and hours. It's incredible how long it takes to get anywhere in LA, because you have all of this mass population, and it's, you know, like at various times, particularly during rush hour, it can take literally hours to go a few miles. It's one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. I had to spend 6 weeks in LA over Christmas one year waiting for my best friend to have a surgery and then recover from that surgery. And we were stuck in LA. And it took, you would have to plan, if he had doctor's visits in the morning, getting there, you know, how long it would take literally to go from 5 miles from the hotel to the University of California at Los Angeles, which is where he had the surgery at their medical center. It could take hours. It would be very frustrating to be stuck in traffic and see. So we've got all these emissions, and during COVID, all the traffic died because everything was shut down and people couldn't go anywhere. And the air quality really improved in places like LA. In places like Beijing, the air quality really radically improved. And now it's gone back, of course, as we have opened back up to those pre-COVID times. How do you value air quality? Well, it's not something that I can capture and say, I'm going to sell you. I guess we can kind of, but I'm going to sell you clean air. We all need it. But we all also need to get places. You all didn't get here on a horse this morning. I'm going to guess that most of you got here by driving a car, because we don't have great public transportation in Oklahoma. If you ride the bus, it can take hours. And as a result, we all degraded the environment somewhat this morning in getting here. When I sat on city council the first time 25 years ago, I was on the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, which is called a COG. It's a Council of Governments. And the COGs are important because that is the way that federal funds are oftentimes allocated. And so one of the things that you want in being part of the COG is you want to get your fair share of highway dollars. And one of the things that we had a problem with the first time that I was on city council 25 years ago in Guthrie was that we experienced, and you can lose federal highway dollars if you have too much pollution. At the time, they modified this rule. Now, most of the pollution that we experienced, we would bust the limits all summer long in Oklahoma City of ozone, because we sit 250 miles north of DFW, which is enormously huge and a big creator of pollution. And because we sit right in the middle of a temperature zone change, we have frontal passage on average in Oklahoma every 3 days. In the winter, that frontal passage is from north to south as Arctic air sweeps through and pushes south. And our air quality during those months is typically pretty good, because the environment to the north of us is largely vacant. But in the summer, we would bust our air quality requirements all the time, because frontal passage during the summertime is not from north to south, it's from warm air building up in the Gulf of Mexico and heading north. And as it does that, it pushes all of that pollution from Dallas-Fort Worth northward to Oklahoma City. How do you solve that problem from a capitalist perspective? We can't control the air. Yeah.
You can get people to take more public transportation and design roads so that people can bike safely without dying, so that you have better air. That's
Okay.
putting a price on it, like.
Right. But that's really hard to do in places like Oklahoma, because we have really bad public transportation. They put a bus stop when I lived in Oklahoma City. So after my first term on city council was over, I moved out of Guthrie and I moved to Oklahoma City to an area called Edgemere Park. And they had a bus stop right outside my house in Edgemere Park. And I thought, well, I should try to take the bus one day to go to UCO, because you could go from that area up here to UCO. I would have had to have gotten on the bus at 5 a.m. in order to make it. At the time I had an 8 o'clock class. We had I actually taught for many, many years at 7 o'clock in the morning. We had lots of classes at 7 o'clock in the morning because we had lots of students who had to be at work at 8, and they would take a class before school at 7. We can't get people to take a class at 8 anymore because that's just like uncivilized to take a class at 8 o'clock in the morning. What are you, crazy? No, gotta sleep in. I liked the 7 a.m. class, by the way, because I get up at about 5 every morning, so it's great for me. But I would have had to have been on the bus literally at 5 in order to make it here for an 8 o'clock class. That's how long it took if you take public transportation in Oklahoma. We don't have good light rail. We don't have good busing. So how do you get around in Oklahoma? It's largely, we're a car society. Almost everybody has a motor vehicle to get here. And so it's hard. You have these failures in that there's an incentive. It's called, in game theory, the tragedy of the commons, because none of us can, figure out what clean air is worth, because it's hard to control it. It's hard to personalize it. It's hard to make it into a private good. You have these market failures. Well, in ethics terms, what we're going to do is we're not going to look at the maximization of utility. We're going to look at the maximization of happiness. So utilitarian ethics says that what we need to do is we need to, in all situations, maximize happiness. So ethics and actions are judged based on the results that they produce. So if I do something that results in overall happiness, that from a utilitarian standpoint is a priori good. Now, you can see that this meets the requirements of the valid theory, right? Because A, it allows for us to come up with universal rules. The rule in utilitarianism is I'm going to produce overall the greatest happiness. Not the greatest happiness for me or my family. You have to look at what will produce the overall greatest happiness for everyone. So the greatest happiness principle. So we can come up with a rule. We can apply that rule universally. It doesn't allow for exceptions. You're not allowed to say it's the greatest happiness for me or the greatest happiness for you or the greatest happiness for my group, my clan. It has to be overall greatest happiness. So it's rational. You're going to have to, why is it rational? Well, you can't say my gut tells me that this is going to produce the greatest happiness. You have to actually do the calculus. You have to actually sit there and think, what is it that I'm doing and how is it going to impact everybody else? And is that going to produce the overall greatest happiness? You have to go through the analysis in a logical, cold, calculating fashion. And arrive at what you think is going to be the correct result. So it's absolutely rational. Doesn't allow you to say, I feel. Can't do that. Can't say I feel. You have to actually think. Is this going to produce the overall greatest happiness? When we came up with this course, for a long time, this course was required. We've now decided that we'll make it an option in one of the directed electives in marketing. But for a long time, it was required. And the reason that it was required is because we had all of these ethical failures in business. And so what we looked about and said is, well, maybe if we offer a course in ethics, maybe we can train people to become more ethical. And we'll have less of these failures in business, which lead to really bad results. The subprime mortgage industry, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, all led to enormously bad results for lots and lots of people. We had a net negative in terms of happiness as a result of those corporate scandals. So we thought, well, we'll offer this course. Now, why is it that the course is no longer absolutely required for marketing majors and sales majors, but it's an option? Well, because we've decided that maybe there are other courses that students need that might be more beneficial, like social media marketing. In an era in which we are now engaging in integrated marketing communication in vastly different ways, maybe that is more important than ethics. I fought against that and I lost. I thought ethics was pretty important. But my colleagues decided that substantive skills in social media marketing might be more appropriate. And that's an enormously popular course, by the way. My argument there is that there's a difference between most preferred and preferred by most. The fact that everybody wants to take social media marketing doesn't mean that everybody should take social media marketing. When I first came back to UCO and I started teaching, I would go around the room and I'd say, why did you take my course in my principles of marketing classes? When I was a political scientist, I stopped asking that question because I got responses from students. I taught, one of the courses I taught in political science was called American National Government. And I would go around the room and I'd say, why are you taking my course? And students would inevitably say, I was young at the time. I was 22 years old. So I was really young. And they would say, I just don't like government politics. It's boring. And the only reason I took your course is because you're not Dr. Jones, who's really old and boring. And I figured because you were young, maybe you wouldn't be boring. And I was fascinated by that response because government is not like a Picasso that you can stand back from and decide that you just don't like it. Government touches everything. It is a pervasive institution that affects everything, from the qualifications of the person that writes the prescription for your eyeglasses to the depth and in what you must be buried is determined by government. So I was always fascinated by it. Now, when I became a marketer, I started asking that question again because students want to be here. You don't have to take a marketing class. It's not required. And so inevitably, almost everybody who's in a marketing class, at least even in the principles of marketing class, by and large, on the whole, they're business majors who need to know something about this. And so I'd go around the room and I'd say, why did you take this class? And they'd say, I want to be an entrepreneur. Great. What do you want to sell? I want to sell cupcakes. That was like at the beginning of the cupcake phase. There was this cupcake shop that started right down the street from my house in Edgemere called Cuppies and Joe. It was the first one that I remember. It's like a whole company based on nothing but cupcakes. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then like all of these other cupcake companies started up. Sarah Cupcakes, and there were all of these little companies that popped up. And my response to students who'd say, I want to start a cupcake company was, how many cupcake companies do we need in Oklahoma? It turns out, not a lot. Because all of those cupcake companies have gone what? Broke. They've gone broke. There's none of them left. Because how do you scale? I mean, like after you've had one cupcake, how many cupcakes are you gonna eat? They were good cupcakes. There are all these other businesses that pop up that are similar to it. All these cookie companies that have popped up. One of my nieces loves Crumble Cookie. She's constantly ordering Crumble Cookie. They're really good cookies. They're really good, but how many cookies can you eat? Turns out she can eat a lot of cookies. And I'm somewhat concerned. I mean, like right now, she's still pretty thin because she does cheernastics. She hates it when I call it that. She's like, it's not cheernastics, it's just cheer. And I'm like, well, it's not cheer that I remember. Like when I was in high school, cheer was people standing on the sidelines of the football game with pom-poms and kind of doing a dance routine. That's not what this is. That's not what you're doing. You're like, doing all of this tumbling. It's like a combination of gymnastics, tumbling, dance, and cheer all combined into one. She's on these competitive cheer teams, which have nothing to do with high school stuff anymore. It's all about winning competitions. And it's tough. It's a very athletic sport, in my opinion. So it's not really cheer, but she likes these crumble cookies, and I'm really concerned, like when that cheer stops, if we continue with the crumble cookies, what's gonna happen? So I would ask these students, like, why do you want to be in my class? They all wanted to do these businesses which involved whatever was the latest and greatest thing. And I'm like, well, somebody's already done that. Like, we need to come up with something else. And maybe, if I can help direct you and point out these things, that will lead to overall greater happiness. If we have ethics classes where you are forced to think about these ideas very deeply, maybe that will produce overall better results than if we don't. Now, what's wrong with this idea? I mean, so all of the valid ethical theories have problems. It's just that they're not fatally flawed, like subjectivism, cultural relativism, and psychological egoism. What could be wrong with utilitarian ethics? The greatest happiness. What could possibly be wrong with that? We can come up with rules. And again, this is the one that business students like the most because it fits their capitalistic model, which is great. There's nothing wrong with capitalism, although we don't have a purely capitalistic society. Why? Because, well, when we had lots of market failures. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we engaged in environmental degradation to the point that, acid rain was killing lakes and streams. So it wasn't just affecting air quality. This pollution in the air is now affecting what is being dropped into heavy metals into lakes and streams, and it's killing the fish. And that's bad because we might need the fish, not just for the fish sake themselves, but also because it's a good food source. And so we need to be aware of that. So what could be wrong with this idea of, well, like what we did is we started coming up with rules and regulations that attempted to correct for what we call the tragedy of the commons. This degradation of what are public goods that we can't put prices on because we can't say this is your square of clean air and everybody else keep out. I can't keep you from breathing my air. So we came up with regulations, right? Now, what could possibly be wrong with this idea of utilitarianism? Well, there are a couple of things. One is the ends don't always justify the means. So let's look at this. If I can find it. Used to be switch it to hopefully it won't. And of course, technology is not going to work. So this was from a series called Eatocracy. How ethical is the chocolate in your Easter basket? Turns out, probably not a lot, probably not really ethical. Modern day slavery still exists. And what this story by CNN's Eatocracy highlighted was that a very small percentage of people are enslaved in order to produce the vast amount of chocolate in the world. Now, from a purely utilitarian standpoint, you can justify this. If you create pain and suffering among a minority, but the majority benefit from it in ways that make them happy. And one of the things that we know about eating chocolate is that it makes you happy. The chemicals in your brain that fire when you eat chocolate are all like, dopamine that make you feel good. So literally you could justify this small percentage of the population being enslaved in order to create overall greater happiness for the larger amount of people. Most of us would say the ends don't always justify the means. This is the calculation that comes out of Machiavelli's The Prince. He never actually says that. He never says that the ends justify the means, but you can tease it out of The Prince. Most of us say that's creepy. Like there's just no, don't do that. A second problem with utilitarianism is, how do you calculate happiness? If we take very discrete situations in which the outcomes are limited and the scope of the impact is temporally minimized, it's easy to calculate happiness. In very stripped down situations. What's an example of that? Well, why is it that you all are here letting me talk to you about this stuff on a Tuesday when you'd rather be doing something else, I'm certain? Well, it's because you have calculated that getting a degree is going to produce overall better results for you than not getting a degree. That's the reason that you're sitting here. Because you know that your chances of success are better if you have this piece of paper than if you don't. Now, for most of my academic career, that statement was not at all in dispute. Lots of people understood that if you wanted to have a successful life, you went to college. That's now in dispute. A lot of students are coming out and they're saying, like, I've got all this debt and I don't have a good job. And, so I would submit to you that most of you have figured this out. I mean, we have these degrees here at the University of Central Oklahoma that, I don't know. I had one student in my class not that long ago. We went around the room and I said, what's your major? And he told me that he was getting a degree in opera. I don't even know that we have a degree in opera. And I'm sitting there thinking that even if we do, I think we do have a degree in musical theater. What are you going to do with that? What are the percentages of people that make a living in musical theater? Not many. So you all have figured out that, like, you could make probably a pretty good living in marketing. That's why you're here. So that's pretty easy to do the calculus. I'm gonna go get a degree in marketing because I'm gonna get a good job and make money and support my family and overall, that's pretty easy to figure out. It gets harder as it becomes more complex. How would we evaluate, again, going back to the Industrial Revolution, how would we evaluate the ethical impact that Henry Ford had on the country? I think overall, at the time when he developed the automobile, people would have said, that's great. It stops. Again, I grew up on a cattle ranch. I know about horses. I've shown horses. One of the things that makes horses fun for me and scary for other people is that they have a little mind of their own and they can hurt you. Or worse yet, they can die on you. You know, you're out on your trek to the county seat and the horse dies. Car's less likely to do that. And in the rain, you've got a roof over your head and climate control. And so are we better off as a result of the introduction of the car than we were? Well, I don't know. We now have all of these problems that we've degraded the environment in such a way that we're experiencing in record-breaking amounts respiratory distress that we didn't have before. Because we're all breathing dirtier air. How do you calculate that? How do you calculate clean air versus ease of transportation? How do you do the calculus on that? It's almost impossible, isn't it? So in an attempt to deal with this, there are two forms of utilitarianism that come about. The oldest is what we'll call act utilitarianism, which is you have to figure out in every situation the calculus and go with it. That's really hard to do. So in an attempt to cure this problem of two things, one, the creepiness factor that we have with some utilitarianism and the calculus problems, we can come up with a second form of utilitarianism called rule utilitarianism, which says, look, what we're going to do is we're not going to try and do the calculus because this becomes really hard. We're going to develop rules that may not seem to, in a discrete situation, produce the most overall happiness, but in the aggregate will produce the most overall happiness. So we're going to develop rules. What is an example of this act versus rule utilitarianism? Well, we can develop rules that say that, you have to cut down on emissions in the car in order to promote cleaner air. And we're all going to pay for that. And although that's going to make us less happy individually, overall, if we produce cleaner, more efficient cars, we're going to have better overall results. Why don't I want to do that as an individual? And why does it create maybe a lot of unhappiness, but overall in the aggregate, the most happiness? Well, at least temporarily, what has happened as a result of the emission standards of cars is that the cost of cars has gone what? Way up. The average price of a new car in the United States today is something like $45,000. That's a lot of money. When I was a kid growing up, the average price of a car was something like $13,000. It's the one area of technology that we haven't seen enormous amounts of decrease. When I was a kid growing up, these devices that you all have, like I had one of the first laptops of anybody in my college. I had a laptop as an undergraduate. Nobody had a laptop as an undergraduate. In fact, professors here at the university, when I was in undergraduate school, didn't have individual desktops. Like a department might have a desktop computer for the entire department. And I had this laptop, and it was enormously expensive. It was something like $1,800 for this laptop. And it weighed probably 10 pounds. And we thought that was just great. How much do your laptops, your tablets weigh? Nothing. iPhone is coming out with, I can't remember which version, like, this is like heavy compared to the new iPhone that's supposed to be coming out. And so what we're doing is we're saying, look, even though this costs, we'll come up with a rule that in the aggregate will produce the most. Like, once we get used to paying the price of a car at $45,000, we'll be better off because the emissions will be lower. We're promoting the development of cars that have no emissions. Now, are they completely green? I don't know, because the vast majority of electricity is still produced by carbon burning methods, which means that tangentially, you're charging, my sister-in-law has a Tesla, the one with the gull wing doors, the SUV, is that an X? She loves it. I hate it. It's got a self-driving feature. Any of you been in a Tesla with the self-driving? It's frightening. She uses it constantly in Dallas. And literally, it's great on the interstate, but like in Dallas traffic, it will start to see something and it'll pause in the middle of an intersection. And it's always like on my side. I'm like, my side, disengage. Stop using this. So we'll come up with rules. The simplest example is, how many of you watched a show? I became fascinated with the show, and I don't know why, because I normally don't like Law and Order kinds of shows. But there was a show called Dexter. Any of you watched Dexter? So Dexter is a serial killer, but he's learned to channel this serial killer tendency in a positive way, right? Because his father, who realizes that he's got a son who's a psychopath, trains him to only kill other killers. That's the whole thing of Dexter. And Dexter works for the police department as a forensic scientist. His specialty is blood splatter analysis, I think. And so he's only killing, well, under an act utilitarian perspective, that would be allowable because you're removing dangerous people from society and you're doing it efficiently without a court system and without the expense of resources. And isn't that great? Well, most of us say, no, you can't do that. Like, vigilante justice is not great. What would happen if we thought all of the police were doing this? Well, you would end up with a dystopian world in which you had something like Judge Dredd. That's been remade, the movie, the original movie, Judge Dredd, I believe, starred, let's see, who was it that started the original? Sylvester Stallone, I think, is Judge Dredd. And they've remade it, but it's this dystopian world in which the police act as judge, jury, and executioner all in one. And as a result, people fear the police, right? So we come up with these rules in an attempt to cure the problems that we had with act utilitarianism. Now, the problem with this is that, is it possible to come up with a rule for every single situation? I can tell you, as somebody who's written a lot of rules. So when I was in the Office of Legal Counsel here at UCO, I used to write a lot of policies. We used to write a lot of rules. They would come to us and they'd say, we have this idea, we want to do this, would you write a rule? And my office would write a rule for things. We would sit in on all these committees. It's impossible to cover every single situation with a rule, right? The minute you come up with a rule, you'll find some reason that there's something that doesn't work with the rule. As a city councilman, I've developed lots and lots of rules, right, called ordinances. And inevitably, you write an ordinance and you find lots of problems with the ordinance. So that's one of the problems. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't try? No, we should try. Absolutely. So if we think of this in Hegelian terms, so we have a thesis, and in relation to a thesis, if an idea stays around long enough, so what you get is you get a challenge to that thesis. So we have a thesis and we're gonna say utilitarianism. You'll have an antithesis, right? And you could view this in maybe duty ethics came along first. We can make that argument that maybe duty ethics came along first and it was the thesis, and then utilitarianism was the antithesis. But we'll, for purposes of this, we'll say this is duty is the antithesis rather than the thesis. What duty ethics says is, look, you can't rely on this idea of happiness because of all of these problems associated with it. The major thinker in this area of philosophy in duty ethics, you can trace duty ethics, of course, back to Socrates and Plato. But in modern parlance, the thinker is Immanuel Kant, and Kant has three great works. He has a critique of practical reason, a critique of pure reason, and the metaphysics of morals. Those are the three works. So Kant says, look, you have certain duties. There are two types of imperatives that arise. There are what Kant says are hypothetical imperatives, which arise out of a result, and this is the practical critique of practical reason, as a result of desire or goals. So, what is your goal? We talk a lot about goals in marketing. What's, for example, for a company, or for you, I try to individualize this, what is a good goal? And one of the things that we should think about as we think about what is a good goal is it possible to develop a irrational goal but execute it in a rational manner? Is it possible to go about fulfilling an irrational goal in a rational manner? And this is Kant's critique of practical reason. Can you do that? Can you pursue an irrational goal in a rational manner? Is it possible? Yes.
You have a definition of how does he define irrational?
What's an irrational goal?
Like what's like is like becoming a professional comedian an irrational goal because it's so difficult? Like how do you
I don't know that that's irrational.
Well, it's super like
I guess an irrational goal would be one that is like maybe immoral or completely emotive. You can have goals that are completely emotive that are not rational. I can give you an example of an irrational goal. So I like jewelry. I have a lot of it. I like watches in particular. I have a lot of watches. Now I have a favorite watch. It's this watch. It's a Rolex. I thought that my life would not be complete until I got a Rolex. I didn't think that my existence was, worthy until I got a Rolex. Does anybody need a Rolex? No. It's a completely, I guess it's somewhat useful, but in the contemporary era, it's a watch, so it's in theory useful. It's supposed to do useful things. It doesn't. It's a horrible time. It loses 2 minutes a month. I have to reset it because it doesn't keep time well. It's an article of jewelry. And for most men, historically, that's been the only jewelry. Like most men don't wear a lot of jewelry. I do. I don't know why. I like jewelry. But, most men don't. A watch is the one thing that they historically would wear. Now, in the contemporary era, nobody even, why do you need a watch? used to, before this device became ubiquitous in our society, like watches were kind of necessary so you could know what time it was if you were out walking around. But now everybody's got a phone. You know what time it is? This keeps much better time than my watch. If I really want to know what time it is, I look at my, like when I look at starting class, I look at the phone to tell me what time it actually is, because that device on the back wall is just wrong. I mean, it's a mechanic, like my watch is, it says it's 10:40. My watch now says that it is 10:44. Why does it say 10? Because I had to set it fast because I know that it loses 2 minutes a month. So I'm constantly having to adjust it. Like, that's an irrational, like you don't need a Rolex. But I went about getting it perfectly rationally. I browbeat my parents until they gave it to me for my high school birthday. I whined until I got what I wanted. You could do it, I mean, if I didn't have parents who would do that, who were susceptible to my incessant complaining, I could figure out a way to get a job and make money and buy the Rolex. Completely irrational, but you can go about it in a completely rational way. So hypothetical imperatives exist because we want something. If you want to get a better job, you should go to college and get a degree in marketing or professional sales. Selling is the only profession that allows you to decide what it is you want to make. Want to make more money? Sell more stuff. It's the only, you can get a degree in accounting and you're going to make a decent living, but you're capped. I mean, you're going to go to work for a company and they're going to say, this is the salary. And if you want to make more money, you're going to have to go get another job. Sales, you don't have to go get another job. You just sell more. Sell that extra case of meat every month so that you can pay for your family to go to Disney World, like my friend Adam that I told you about. I'm out of time. So if you got ducks, come see me, and we will finish up with this next time, talk about corporate social responsibility, and then we will have the first exam, and I'll talk about that as well. Let's see, actually, we're gonna go to the stop the video.